Hola comunidad. Welcome back to another episode of Host to Darkness. Tonight we have bone-chilling experiences for you, from demonic encounters in the middle of nowhere to religious cults performing disturbing rituals, each of which are from Mexico, Guatemala, and Spain. If you like content such as this, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to get further updates, and you can also visit our pages on platforms such as Spotify, Reddit, and TikTok, all of which will be attached in the description below. Now, let's move on to tonight's experiences and hope none of you become the next protagonist of a terrifying experience on Host of Darkness. Hi, I don't know if there's a Mexican community here, but I'd like to share a story. About 10 years ago, I was traveling with my family through Huila and then Puerto Escondido, and eventually we ended up in Acapulco. The thing is, at some point during the trip, and well, honestly, I don't know exactly where it was, but I think it was on the way from Acapulco to Mexico City. It was around 6 p.m. I remember the sunset. Everyone was asleep on the bus, but I was looking at the landscape through the window, and in the distance, in the forest surrounding the highway, I saw a very tall building, similar to a church, entirely black with a strange figure at the top, resembling something of a demon. It really gave me the creeps just looking at it. And when I turned around, I noticed my mom was looking out the window, and she just said, to which I nodded, and she mentioned just seeing it just gave her a really bad feeling anyway. As the truck kept moving, we couldn't see any more details of what it was, but it's still an image that lives in my memory. Does anyone know anything about a building like this in the areas I mentioned? Sadly, I haven't been back in those areas, so I haven't been able to investigate. I'll never forget that night. I moved with my wife and our son Mateo to a small town surrounded by mountains and filled with stories that, until then, seemed just like tales to me. But that night, I learned that some legends are real. I was checking the stable, worried about the strange noises we'd been hearing for days. And that's when I saw her, the black goat, who had always been calm, standing on her hind legs, staring at me with eyes that weren't normal. Goat eyes, they were human. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to approach, but every move I made seemed to be studied by that creature. She didn't bleat, she didn't even make any sound. She just stared at me, as if she knew something I didn't. And that same night, while Mateo was sleeping, I heard scratching on his bedroom window. I went over and I almost fell over when I saw the silhouette of a goat leaning against the glass, her eyes shining with a strange human glow. Her hoof rested on the wood, and for a moment, I could have sworn she smiled.
"Let me see him,"
whispered a voice that came from her throat, although it didn't sound human. My heart was racing. I ran to close the window, but the goat retreated just a moment before. My heart was racing. I ran to close the window, but the goat retreated just a moment before disappearing into the darkness of the yard. The worst part was when I looked at Mateo's crib, and there was this feeling that someone or something had been right in front of him. We didn't sleep all night. I stayed awake, listening to the footsteps that couldn't have been anyone else's but that creature's. and every time I blinked, I had the horrible feeling that the goat was closer, studying us, calculating its moves like a human stalking its prey. And since that night, we can no longer leave Mateo alone for a second. Sometimes, when the moon is full, I hear a clicking sound outside, like hooves slowly approaching, and I always feel those human eyes watching me from the darkness, waiting for the moment we let our guard down. I never thought that something as innocent as a goat could desire something so terrible, but I learned that some gazes hide intentions that cannot be understood until it's too late. I live in an apartment in Guatemala, and since I was a child, I was raised believing in God, angels, and demons. Over time, I stopped believing in this. In fact, I'm quite skeptical now. But one day, we were at home with my cousins. My cousin decided to go to the bathroom that day, and we were playing FIFA. It was approximately 2 in the morning, while the rest of us were in the living room. And when he returned, we saw my cousin with a face of horror, claiming that he had seen a girl in the dining room sincerely, and no one believed him since, as I mentioned before, I stopped believing those types of things, and my cousin, they don't really believe in those types of things either. 2 days later, while I was doing my homework, I heard some children playing in the dining room, and I felt a chill run through my body because there were no children in my home. I didn't want to leave my room, however. I decided to go out, but I didn't see anything. So I left it as maybe something of a figment of my imagination. And during the following weeks, paranormal events continued to occur. For example, my cousin found a girl playing in his bed in his room, and he swears he saw her jumping on her bed. Later, while we were in the living room, we heard someone playing the guitar that was in one of the rooms. We could hear the sounds of the strings as if someone was playing them. After all these events, possibly the strangest and last thing that happened was what happened with the dog. That day, we were in the living room on the second level. We were watching 12 Hearts, and this time we were 5 people at the time. At one point, the little dog of the house came up with us, so I started to play with him, and at one point I threw his ball, and it accidentally entered a room where things were not used were stored. And the little dog did not come out, so I decided to call him. However, he didn't respond to my calls and only growled. So I called my cousin, who was the owner of the little dog, but he didn't obey him either. So we looked out the entrance to the room, and there was this little dog staring at us and growling. He had red eyes and was in an attacking position. All very strange because he always used to be very kind. We turned on the lights so he could recognize us. We thought that maybe because it was dark, he didn't recognize us at all. However, this didn't help, and little by little, I approached the little dog trying to touch him, trying to get him to recognize me, but he lunged at me, and even though I managed to dodge him, he still ripped my shirt and made a small wound on my chest. We decided to call my aunt, who began to pray at the time, and the dog became more aggressive. So finally we called the pastor of the church, and he arrived and began to pray and perform some kind of ritual. My aunt only asked us to hold hands and pray along with her and the pastor. After a few minutes, the dog calmed down in addition to this, and the pastor indicated that we should check the room. We searched it and found some books that narrated legends of Guatemala. My aunt also threw away a box whose contents I didn't know of since she didn't really show it to us. But it had a padlock and only she knew what was inside it. Although I don't like to believe in spiritual things, that story has made me believe that perhaps there is the possibility of possessions and paranormal events.